Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Art School of Graduates podcast. My name is Justin Robinson. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Kenny Borg. I've known this gentleman a long time. I got my first cut at working and figuring out if I really like graphic design in his father's shop. So it is a pleasure and honor to have this man on with me today. Kenny, how are you doing, brother?
Thanks, Justin. Doing so good, man. I'm so stoked to be here with you and for this conversation.
Yes. So let's talk about it, Kenny. You've done a lot, man, since the last time we've talked. Dude, you went from CEO to now you're turning the page, I would say, into more of a mentor, leadership, like helping people grow. So what caused that shift for you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think having my own mentors, to be honest with you, there was so many years in my career where I did it all on my own and thought I had to muscle through it and figure it all out by myself. And then I was very fortunate to be exposed to some amazing mentors really at my peak point of struggle, which led me to just having a passion for the work of mentorship and coaching, and ultimately going to get some education in that world, and ended up supporting others through the lens of mentorship.
That's good. So let's talk about your journey. So reflecting on this journey you had from merch camp to the social life and building a company literally from the dorm room. I remember it. I remember when you guys had the shop at Fresno State, Dog Prints. I still have the shirt. So it's just like, how was that? What role did your mentors help you within that growth and that aspect?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I went to Fresno State. I played football there, and I had kind of a career-ending second ACL tear, and decided just to funnel all that energy into business. And as you mentioned, my father had a shop, a screen printing shop, so he was making T-shirts. I kind of grew up in that environment, and he began to mentor me into that. And then the support of the football program and the athletics department at Fresno State, when I did have that injury, they were like, just go all in on this business thing. You seem really passionate about it. They super supported me. Ended up having a campus store while I was still a student, right? So we were paying rent to the university, and the whole university just really rallied behind me. And I was so supported, and it was so safe to start the entrepreneurial journey in that way. And then we grew enough in size to where I was like, all right, I'm ready to move back to LA and open a proper headquarters and scale this business. And that was when it really got challenging, because I was like, oh, my little safe bubble of university that I've known is not there for me anymore. And I was in the big city, and it was super confronting. So it took me some time to find new mentors, but eventually they showed up, and I definitely wouldn't be as far as I am in life without them.
Okay. Yeah. When it comes to seeking a mentor, what was the driving force for you? Was it just hitting these roadblocks, or was it more of trying to not fail? If you can explain that.
I think that mentorship in sports, which is, what I grew up focusing on in my life, it's just part of it. Your coaches are your mentors, and that was kind of just built in. I didn't realize that mentorship was actually what a lot of my coaches were providing. And it took me kind of being removed from that environment when I moved to LA to realize that I don't have the guidance that I've had from these older, wiser individuals in my life. And didn't think right away to seek out a mentor. I wish I would have, because I probably would have saved myself a lot of suffering. And to answer your question, I was really challenged by life in the real world and growing a business and all the things that come along with that. And I was embarrassed to ask for help at that age. I was in my mid-20s, and I thought I needed to be at a better place or have more accomplished at that point before I asked for someone that I respect to help me. And that was really my fatal flaw, to be honest. That way of thinking created a lot of extreme challenge that I had to overcome because I wasn't willing to ask for help.
So would you say working through that process of having that mentor, someone you kind of almost removing ego from the situation. Was that what helped you transition into becoming like a leadership and transformational coach? Was like your own personal journey?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, eventually I found myself working with an executive coach when I had
Mm-hmm.
just raised outside investment for my company for the first time. And that really put me over the edge. I was like, oh my gosh, we've got all this money in the bank, and I'm now working with these very astute investors that are
Mm-hmm.
like way more business savvy than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm feeling a ton of pressure. And I have this, I had a team of 25 people at the time that I was managing. And I honestly, vulnerability, which was rare for me at the time, was what led me to it. Led
Mm-hmm.
me to finding a coach at the time. And I was just sharing with another entrepreneur of like how hard a time that I was
Mm-hmm.
having. And he's like, I got someone for you. I want you to talk to this guy who's my coach.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through that work with that man that, I really started to form an identity outside of work for the first time and build really critical self-worth that I hadn't established while I was
Mm-hmm.
just like, dead set on the entrepreneurial dream. And through that work, I was, so transformed and so connected to myself and became so clear and so confident. And I was like, man, this is like the best thing on the planet. I'm gonna go get certified as a
Mm-hmm.
coach, and I'm gonna share this work with others. So in the early days, I worked with a lot of entrepreneurs. I still do, but I just had this community of founders and entrepreneurs that was having just as hard a time as I was. Like
Mm-hmm.
everyone knows that most businesses fail. So I would say that probably the number one reason for that is because it's lonely at the top. It's lonely when you don't have people that you can really open up to, and everyone's looking to you for answers as a leader of a company. So
Mm-hmm.
having a coach is like the most critical decision I ever made.
So, with your 15 years of experience as a CEO and leadership coach, what would you say was the most common challenge you see founders or leaders facing today, or even maybe even in the future? Like, what are some things you see that most people don't see?
Hmm. We're moving pretty fast as a society right now. Things are changing
Mm-hmm.
very quickly. Obviously, AI is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Political environment, like there's so much happening, and it's really been a conversation in the coaching world since the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
that leaders are now expected not just to lead the company and to provide guidance and direction and vision, but they're also expected to show up for their people and create a safe environment
Mm-hmm.
for their employees, for their company, a healthy culture, a people first culture, and help really create an environment that can hold a lot of the emotional strain that people are
Mm-hmm.
going through, given where we're at in this crazy world, right? And wars
Yeah.
and weather patterns, and like the list goes on of all the things that are stressing people out. Parents are having a really hard time. I mean, I know that because I just became one, right? It's
Yeah. Congrats
hard.
on that too.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. But it's hard. It's hard to be a parent in the modern
Mm-hmm.
world, right? Like one of the questions in the first debate was, what are you going to do about childcare costs in this country? And neither candidate answered it, unfortunately. But that's like a huge stressor. So
Mm-hmm.
these are things that leaders of companies, whether you're, an executive or a
Mm-hmm.
manager, you have to show up for your people in these ways, because if you don't, the pressure of just what's going on in everyone's lives doesn't have any place to, express itself. And we spend most of our time in the workplace and with the people that we work with. So if that's not a place where you can, be yourself and share what's really going on and like have a supportive community,
Mm-hmm.
then we're not going to make it, man. Like we got to change. People
Right.
need help. We got
Right.
to be more supportive to one another. So that's the
So,
biggest issue, I think. That in coaching with leaders, it's like how do you start to take on that additional job
mhm.
of being that type of support and creating that type of supportive environment for your people?
Yes. Yeah. I've always wondered when it comes to a person that's kind of been up there, like you said, it's lonely at the top.
Hmm.
Um, how do you get them to buy in on like some of these key ingredients for building a thriving and positive like organizational culture within their business? Because it's like, I kind of think of it as like I did it all to get here. Like
Hmm.
I know enough, but how is it that you can get those people to buy into those like key ingredients for building a thriving community and culture?
Well, as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
I refuse to do that. I refuse to try and get people to buy in. They have to want that. And I work with people who innately want that. They might not be there yet, but they want that. They want to be a great people leader. They want to be a people over profits business and lead that type of a company. If they're not naturally that way, and they're bringing in someone like myself to work with them, to help them create that environment, to check a box, or for PR purposes, that's not going far enough. And there's a lot of people that don't actually care that much, but it's like what every other company is doing. So they feel that they need to, find a way to do it. And I think employees are starting to see through that. I mean, I know they are.
Yeah.
People know the difference between like authentic, deep care in their leaders and people who inspire them versus people that are just like, bringing in a coach or some new system or program or some HR thing to check the box of like employee development and culture work.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And there's plenty of that. We're moving out of a world where that is the norm, in a world where there are a lot of incredible leaders setting the precedent for what it looks like. I think like power is with the people. So when employees rise up and demand that type of leadership from the people that they work with, and they're making their decisions as to what companies they want to work with based on the quality of the leaders in it, then I think the world starts to change. And I think you're starting to see that happen. So it's a natural process. And, I hope my contribution to that is to elevate the people who innately, the leaders who innately care deeply about that, and who are either already doing it or are passionate about becoming that type of a leader, and helping to elevate them, empowering them to elevate their companies so that we have more examples of what that looks like. And that becomes not just the norm, but like the way that business is done.
So in these rooms, have you ever ran into an issue where it's always been either one personal buy-in and the other person is saying no, or have you ever run into those major issues where it's like you might be dealing with maybe one CEO or CEO and a CFO, and they're both, one is saying, yeah, we need this, and the other one is saying this is just hogwash? Have you ever dealt with something like that?
Yeah, all the time, for sure.
Wow.
I mean, not everyone's, it's rare that everyone's just on the same page. And when you're bringing in, coaching and mentorship and outside support into your company, the status quo is going to get challenged. And if you already have like a psychologically unsafe environment within the organization, the new person coming in to like support making that better can seem like a threat to some people.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty common, and my role in those situations is to hold space for that and not try to force anyone to open up or do this type of work with someone like myself and really meet them where they're at. And I think it just comes down to making people feel seen and heard. And sometimes they don't have space for that. So a natural reaction to anything new that's being put on their plate, whether it's culture work or, employee development work or even personal development work, is it can just feel like more work unless they can connect to it and see value and meaning in doing that.
Okay, that's interesting. I was just curious about that because I feel like with the new age of like mental health, understanding like the psychology of like the workplace and things like that, how would you approach something like this where it's you can tell that the workers' mentals are very much drained, and you can tell that the CEO or CFO or the person in charge is coming to you. Like, do you ever take the approach to go towards the worker to build them up, or is it to build up the top so it trickles down?
It really has to be like a 360-degree buy-in, right? And it does start with the top, for sure. And it's very common for senior leaders to bring in coaching for their organization, but not actually enroll in that coaching themselves, which is an absolute waste of time and money. Everybody has to be bought in. So how I approach it is I just get really clear on like what is the existing system for how we measure success, employee fulfillment, like what do performance reviews look like, what's being evaluated in those reviews, and build into that so that it's not this big drastic change of like, hey, now you're going to be measured on all these different things, and here's what you need to be achieving in addition to your current job in terms of your personal development and performance. It's more so like what's the path of least resistance to add value to the system that already exists, and sometimes changes do need to be made in the system, but I try to be as kind of symbiotic in the existing environment as possible.
So with working with mentors in business, like how do you deal with these influences, these outside influences that may still kind of, poke their head in to break this, to break the faction that you're trying to build? So is there a way you go about that?
But what would an example of that be? An outside influence?
So say hypothetically, you're coaching, you're working, but you still have like 2 or 3 people who are still kind of being toxic in the sense where they're not fully giving it a go, and you can still see that it's causing a few splinters within it. Like, how would you approach things like that? Is that like a more personal conversation with the owner to say, hey, these people are buying in, but you still have some foxes in the hen house? Like, would that be kind of like a conversation like that? Or would you kind of see it as, this is going to take really long and really hard, I might need, I don't know, maybe some help or anything? Like, I was just curious about that, because I feel like a lot of workplaces do have those that buy in, and then you have those that also kind of like disrupt the peace sometimes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's really natural, actually, especially for when someone like myself is coming into the organization to, I don't want to say I'm not coming in to shake things up, but that kind of happens in a lot of ways. And it's people having to, adjust their thinking to some new information and really enroll in being a better contributor and participant in a healthy culture. And a psychologically safe culture. And psychological safety is something we talk about a lot. So when I run into that type of a situation where there's like a sour apple or something, I don't see it as a sour apple. I see it as somebody that like has a lot that they're holding, whether it's in their professional or their personal life. And I try to meet them with space and presence and create an environment, both in conversation with myself and the rest of their team, where they can be heard with whatever it is they need to get off of their chest. And sometimes, we'll do 360 interviews and feedback surveys so people can get more direct feedback on what it is that others are experiencing in them and how they're making others feel. So there's a couple of different ways to approach that. And it's always super specific to the size of the company and the size of the team and, what type of resistance people are exhibiting and in a coaching type of situation.
Okay. Yeah. Cause it's like, after you've worked somewhere for a while, once you're out of it, you're like, dang, that was toxic, so it's just like, I was wondering, like, how do you deal with those things? But that's really informational for you to share with me. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
I would just add, like, toxic is a really interesting word, and I think it's one that has been applied in society to many different things: toxic behavior, toxic masculinity. And so I try to be really careful in using that word in any professional setting, because it really jumps over the opportunity to figure out what's really going on. And if somebody is toxic, like, what's behind that for them. And a lot of times it does start at the top. A lot of times there's been toxic leadership that's led to certain employees reacting to that in a certain way that one might call toxic. But I try to really not pass any judgment until everybody's been heard and had an opportunity to share like what their experience has been like as part of the organization.
So you said something where it's like checking not only on the mental health, but the emotional intelligence too. So can you talk about the role of emotional intelligence in leadership and how it affects decision making during like these times of growth and change?
Well, I think at this point, emotional intelligence is kind of a prerequisite to being successful in any team environment and growing any company. Doesn't mean that it's work that everybody's done. It's certainly not stuff that we learn in school, right? Like how
Yeah.
to have empathy for others. And the the way that I like to think of emotional intelligence that I think is accessible for people is, emotions are feelings, they're not words. And so in this moment, like I feel warm in my chest, right? Like I feel happy to be here with you. I feel love and connection for Justin, a friend that I've had since college.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going on like behind the scenes of the words that we're speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And to know that in one another and to be able to connect at that level before we just get into like, all right, so here's the action items and the deadlines and
Mm-hmm.
here's the meeting talking points is really important. And there's multiple strategies for like how to bring emotions into conversations at work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trying to get something done, especially if there's like conflict or
Mm-hmm.
there's a challenging conversation that needs to be had, a lot of times I would recommend that like lead with the challenging stuff. Like just come out and be like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's the issue. Here's what I'm observing, or here's the feedback from the team.
Mm-hmm.
And then get curious about like, why is it this way? Or how are you feeling? What's
Yeah.
going on for you? Like giving space for emotions to be present in the conversation instead of just like boom, 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 moving on to, whatever the next bit of the workflow is
Mm-hmm.
without creating space for that type of connection and conversation. I think it absolutely has a place in the workplace. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's what emotional intelligence is. It's your ability to connect to that, connect to emotion and feeling within yourself, whether you're a leader or being led. And at the end of the day, everyone's a leader. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone has, I think, a responsibility to cultivate that capacity within themselves so they can show up
Mm-hmm.
with EQ, with the people that they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly as a leader, you're responsible, I think, for having that capacity within yourself and bringing that level of presence and ability to emotionally connect
Mm-hmm.
and bringing it out in your people and creating space for them to tap into that for themselves and inviting it.
That's so good. Yeah. I was just curious about these things because it's like that. Now, this is something I'm just interested in. With how can I phrase this? With dealing with a creative, like someone that is a singer, songwriter, producer, businessman, an artist. How would you approach someone like them? Like, how would you approach someone who is very much trying to hone in on themselves? Like they themselves are the business. How would you
Mm-hmm.
approach someone like that to tap into that innermost, like, hey, you are a leader, you are in charge, you have these tools, you have this access within you to work. How would you approach someone like that?
It's hard to say without actually knowing who the person is because everybody's different, especially creative people.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone also has the capacity for, emotional intelligence, emotional connection, and leadership. And to me, it really just starts with self leadership. So that's where I would start with someone is like, what is that idea of self leadership mean to you? Because you can't lead anyone else or a business or a career if
Mm-hmm.
you can't lead yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, self leadership really means the ability to recognize what it is going on in your internal and your external world, and what is not in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And to take those, to see that, to be able to feel that and see that, the things that aren't in alignment, and make conscious decisions as to how you want to, correct for that or what you want to do about it, and build a capacity to do that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And to know like, hey, oh wow, that doesn't feel good. That thing that's happening, or that conversation I just had, or that song I just made, or that contractor I just worked with that just shipped product back to me. It doesn't feel good, and I need to
Mm-hmm.
have the self leadership capacity to assertively decide, make a decision that's in my best interest, the interest of my art, the interest of my business, and act in that fashion.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Just being a creative myself, I think about those things. It's like it's almost like how can I get out of my way, you know,
Hmm.
to do those things. But I think that's very important what you said is just eliminating those things that don't align with where you're going or what you see for yourself. That's truly a gem right there. Eliminate those things so that don't align with what you're doing. That's a gem. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, I'm
So,
curious if as I say that, if there's like anything in your life that comes up as an example of like what one of those things could be that's not in alignment.
it's not that it's not in alignment. It's more things on the path of a lot of a lot of coals in the fire. It's just like
Mm.
some of the personal things me and my wife are working on and wanting to work towards, on
Right.
top of being a teacher, being a professor, and still not being able to be in like a full art studio, but I'm still finding ways within this smaller office to create. So it's just like hearing that it makes sense to eliminate things that don't align with how how you want your story to go. And I think that's like very telling for a lot of creators because we have a tendency to live in our head. And you've been there. You've sat down at those tables where you're just kind of like overthinking it when it's just like it's either this or this. You pick the choice, this or this. So that's why I was just wondering how it would affect someone as a creator and a creative.
Yeah, as you hear that, or as you say that, what comes up for me is just having the space to actually sit down and think about that choice. Is
Mm-hmm.
it this or this?
Mm-hmm.
And really just being able to slow down and get off of the hamster wheel of like moving
Yeah.
from one thing to the next thing and spreading
Mm-hmm.
your energy across all these different things you got going on,
Mm-hmm.
and actually just look at it from a bit of a distance and
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself from like a place of inner knowing what's the right decision for me right now, like what's my truth in this, what
Mm-hmm.
feels true for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's going to give me something to reflect on. That definitely is. So I'm curious. You work with different mentors from businesses, indigenous culture, future technology, psychology. So how do these influences shape your coaching approach?
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is some of the people that are my mentors from like very different modalities and
Yeah.
industries, ways of thinking that I've shared about with you. And I think I just got some exposure early on to like some non-traditional mentorship. I worked
Mm-hmm.
with a Native American chief, a Lakota Indian chief named Chief Philip Scott, and he really rocked my world in terms of how First Nations people think about
Mm-hmm.
life, business, everything. Like it really, like, it was centered around decolonization and decolonizing the Western mind. The work that I did with him, which is a lifelong effort for a privileged white man in America who hasn't had it too hard in life. And
Mm-hmm.
so to be able to see things through the lens of people who have not had those privileges and opportunities, and understand that most of the world is having that experience actually, that right there is just so different than the business school conversation of like how to grow and scale a startup and get venture
Mm-hmm.
capital and exit.
Mm-hmm.
So that that really, just that simple idea shifted my coaching philosophy and allowed me to really bring conversations to people about how to see the world through other people's eyes, and how to really have empathy for the impact of their decisions and actions
Mm-hmm.
on everyone around them, their family, their community, their business,
Mm-hmm.
and care enough to take the time to find out what that is. What is that impact that you're having on people?
Mm-hmm.
How are you making people feel? And creating a spider web of connection with everyone that you have an impact on in your
Mm-hmm.
life, as really like a foundational piece to anything that you're building or creating in your life. whether that's starting a family or launching a creative project or making music or building a business.
Okay. So I'm curious, how do you prepare for these conversations that you're going to have? Like, do you meditate? Do you read? Like, what is your way of organizing Kenny before he goes into these spaces? Knowing, I mean, sometimes it's unknowing of what you're walking into, and sometimes it is knowing, but how do you prepare mentally for the spaces you enter?
I definitely have a meditation practice for sure. You know, a really simple one that I always do. I did it before this podcast today and it's so easy. Anyone can do it. Is it okay if I demonstrate it real quick?
Go for it. Yes, absolutely.
So if you think about, you know, there's a chakra system in some of the Eastern traditions. It's not something that like everyone in the West is familiar with, but these are the energy centers throughout your body. And they extend from your root, the base of your spine, all the way to your crown, right above your head. And if you're sitting with your spine erect and really tapping into deep, long breaths and moving that breath all through your chakra system, what you're doing is you're connecting the breath, the prana, which is life force, through all of your energy centers, which is essentially the straight line that is connecting you as a human to the earth beneath you and the sky above, right? The earth being grounding, stability, foundation, roots, the sky being inspiration, vision, expansive, just from an energetic perspective. So to really just like close your eyes and drop into your breath and breathe deeply, literally up and down your spine, is a very centering, grounding, and uplifting practice that you can do in 3 to 5 minutes. That is like the number one thing I do before I meet with anybody. And if I'm meeting with someone and I'm feeling that there's like a frantic energy between us, I will often invite us to do that practice together.
So how did you know to tap into that? How did you know to tap into the breathing, the deep breaths, the chakra? What caused you to lean into that?
I've been doing yoga since I was 20, probably 18. Yeah. And I've always been called to it. My fiance is half Indian. And so, you know, like our daughter has that ethnic background. And I've always just been drawn to the wisdom of that part of the world, which it supersedes anything. You know, this country is 250 years old. A lot of the Eastern faith traditions and sciences and technologies of yoga are 2,500, 4,000 plus years old.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something I've been studying for a long time and have found a lot of personal growth and value. And that also came through mentorship. And I was put into contact with people throughout my 20s and 30s that really showed me how simple it can be to sit up straight and breathe deeply and move breath through your energy centers.
So in your personal life, what role does mentorship play? Like for you, I know you have mentors that help you in your mentorship practice, but how does mentorship in your personal life like influence you and help you in general?
Yeah, I want to be clear on like what a mentor is, because it can really be anybody. You know, a mentor can be your friend if you're going to them for guidance. So, and mentorship doesn't have to be like a committed 6-month mentorship relationship. It can just be one conversation. And I think it's as simple as like being willing to ask for help and to get support from another. And so let's call getting support from someone else mentorship. And so in that sense, you know, in my life, I have friends that I go to for guidance. I have actual formal mentors who I've asked to be my mentor that have agreed to enter into that type of a committed relationship with a consistent meeting schedule. And then I have my own coaches and my own therapists, and I see those people as mentors as well.
Yeah, I have. The reason I asked is because I have a mentor, and it took me a minute to get to that point. I feel like a lot of men miss the mentorship aspect because of ego, and they're afraid of that vulnerability. And so I asked that question because Yeah.
That was
I was in the same boat, but I was kind of like you, where I was like seeking, like, how do I do this thing called life? No one gave me a playbook. It's like I can't ask my dad how he did life.
hmm,
Yeah, his life was very different. When he was 20 or 30, he was doing something very different than what we're doing at 20 or 30. So I
hmm,
kind of had to seek it out, and getting that personal mentor was something that I has been very fruitful for me, because it's somebody that, like you said, I can just send a text message you, hey, can you talk? Yeah. Oh, hey, can I call you? I'm busy today, but let me hit you tomorrow. And it's like one of those things. That's why I was very curious. It's like, I know you do it professionally. How does it work for you at home? That's why I was asking like that question, because I was curious to see how many how many men actually choose mentorship, or do they choose to just, I know this sounds crazy, but just raw dog life, just out here
hmm,
trying to just do it themselves. And I think they're missing the
yeah,
importance of having a mentor, or yeah, having a mentor. Because I have a spiritual mentor, and I actually have like a physical mentor, like just
hmm.
in general. So that's interesting. I said that spiritually. How do you tie this all in so that when you're focused and you did your breaths, you go into this space, you don't bring that energy back home with you? Like how do you disconnect from those things?
Yeah, I mean, you started by asking about spirituality,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you also used the word disconnection,
Hmm.
and I think that's a good place to start as I try to answer that. But spirituality is not a term that everybody hears and is like, oh yeah, that's a part of my life, or I want that.
Hmm.
But I think foundationally, we're there's the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Hmm.
The spirit is the deeper stuff within you, the stuff that maybe it's harder to put into words. Those feelings of, it's not happening in the analytical mind of like what I think. It's
Hmm.
very much more in the what I feel when I'm around other
Hmm.
people and other places. Like that, that's all to me spirituality. It's authenticity. It's truth. And I would hope that in that sense, like anyone can connect with it. Right? It's the natural
Hmm.
world. Like Mother Earth and nature is spiritual in
Hmm.
my opinion. And so that like separation or disconnection that you mentioned of like, how do I not bring the work, into my personal
Hmm.
life? And that I think is kind of the main issue is disconnection and separation, and thinking that we need to not bring work home and disconnect from what happened that day,
Hmm.
because if we're having to do that, then it probably means that we're actually not in alignment with the work that we're doing.
Hmm.
And that's not true for everyone. I mean, there's therapists and trauma counselors that have to hear about everyone's really challenging stuff all day, and it's probably important that they have some practices to not bring that home. But at the same point, your work is really who you are. It's your expression in the world.
Hmm.
It's how you serve others. And so to be able to integrate that into your life in a way that works for you, where you're actually focusing on being more connected than disconnecting as much as you can, is something that I think is really like foundational to healing a lot of our society's issues. Right? And like people talk about work life balance and being able to disconnect and unplug. And in that sense, I think it's great. Like
Hmm.
unplug, yes, for sure. But whatever you're doing professionally, cultivate that craft in your free time, if you're passionate about it. I think that's something to encourage for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's so. So, what qualities do you believe will define most successful leaders in the next decade?
Hmm. Yeah, what a great question. I think we did a good job of talking about that when we were talking about leadership and emotional intelligence. I think the number one quality would be, how good do you make people feel,
Hmm.
and how well of a job can you do as a leader to both be the guide and have vision and really set the direction and the pace for the people that you work with as a leader, and
Hmm.
make sure that their emotional well-being in that work is of the highest priority, and that they're feeling fulfilled and inspired and alive. Can you inspire people? I mean, leadership is really about how you make people feel, and
Mm-hmm.
people want to be inspired by the people that are leading them.
Yeah, they truly do. So we're going to tap into a little bit of the personal now. You did mention you have your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So how did becoming a dad influence like your leadership approach, how to direct people on these personal and professional journeys? Because I know we were talking before we even recorded that, like, you were like, I was like, how's everything going? He was like, man, I just had some good cuddles this morning with her, so I'm feeling good. So how has becoming a dad influenced you on this journey?
Oh, well, yeah, our daughter is 6 months old, 6.5 months old. So to be honest with you, I'm still processing that. I'm in process around that.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of ways of thinking and ways of being that are changing, and that definitely transfers over to my work. I would say that it makes things a lot simpler having a kid, because like what's important to you becomes very clear very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the things that I was doing before, ways I was spending my time, things I was working on, people I was in relationship with have just naturally kind of gone away. And those were decisions that maybe I needed to make for myself, that those things were not in alignment for me. The ways I was spending my time in a lot of ways were not in alignment. And having a baby just kind of eliminated them in a way that I wasn't able to myself. And it's helped me to bring that sense of really getting clear on like what's actually important to you to my clients as well, without like them needing to have a
Mm-hmm.
kid to do so.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. That's beautiful, man. I'm so happy for you for that.
Yeah, thanks
So
for the
Kenny, don't want to hold you too much longer, man, but I'm just got a couple more questions for you, man. Like, what key piece of advice would you offer aspiring entrepreneurs or leaders as they embark on this journey that they're creating?
Yeah, Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a good place to start. And just that idea, I mean, you can read the book, it's a great book, but yeah, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? And for me, the answer was because I want to be like these other people that I see in the news that have
Mm-hmm.
grown these unicorn companies and had these big exits and
Mm-hmm.
made lots of money. And that was just so far from what my actual authentic truth and creative expression in the world was.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time to correct course on that.
Yeah.
So starting with why, like, why do you really want to do this? Is it to help others? Is it to change the world? How do you want to change it? Is it to solve a very specific issue? And really that why like has to center around people. It has to
Mm-hmm.
center around helping people and making the world a better place, which I truly believe is human nature, right? It might not be, we haven't learned that that's the way to be, and that should be the top priority. And
It hasn't been displayed either. We always see the bad before we see the good.
yeah, there's not a whole lot of, more so these days. There are
Yeah.
great examples of that, I would say, but in other, in other leaders and other entrepreneurs. And I think like Blake Makowski from Tom Shoes, like he was one of the early impact entrepreneurs that
Yeah,
really
he
created
was.
a new business model that a lot of people have adopted. And what I loved about that is he encouraged other people to steal his business model. Right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's enough for all of us. Elon Musk, not my favorite person in a lot of respects, but he did the same thing. Like he gave away the Tesla electric battery technology away to other manufacturers, instead of keeping it all to himself. And so like you can have your opinions on whether electric cars are like the way of the future, but assuming they reduce some fossil fuel emissions, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's good that people have options if that's the choice that they want to make for themselves and how they move about the world in terms of their vehicles.
Yeah, yeah, man, that's really good. That is really good. So, Kenny, before I let you go, man, I enjoyed our conversation. I have a question for you. How do
Uh-huh.
you want to be remembered? What is the legacy of Kenny Borg going to look like when you leave these rooms, when you become the grandfather? How do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, that's a big question. One of my therapists asked me once, is like, what do you want them to write on your tombstone? It's a
I'm
big one.
not there yet. I'm not talking about you, Dad. I want you to still be here, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like there's not a part of me that like thinks about my legacy where it's like something I need to consciously build. I think if I'm living my life by my values, then my legacy will be left in a good way. I guess in this moment, I would answer by saying, like, I hope people think of me, they remember me based on my children and how they're moving through the world, and that being in a good way. And if I was a good father and I'm remembered for that, that would probably be the most meaningful thing to me.
Yes, it is. Well, you guys, thank you so much for listening to my podcast today. My name is Justin Robinson. I had the great Kenny Borg, and this is the Art School Graduates Podcast. We'll catch you guys later. Peace.
Thanks, Justin.